Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue, and this week we're going to kick things off on our first episode with a deep dive into Penn State's new era of recruiting. In case you've missed it lately, there have been some commitments coming for the Penn State Nittany Lions. I know it's been a little while since we had a wave of good news on the recruiting trail for this squad, but we are there now. Tyler Calvaruso handling business locally at Lions247.com. We're also joined on this episode by Alan True, who does a fantastic job as a national analyst with 24/7 Sports. Very helpful for us over the years at Lions 24/7. And he has really a base in the Great Lakes region. Very familiar what Matt Campbell has tried to do in that region, what Matt Campbell continues to try to accomplish at Penn State now, and kind of the type of player profile that this staff is maybe going after along the way. They might be able to do now a little bit differently at Penn State. Guys, thank you to both of you for the time. And I wanted to begin by going over to Alan because you have a little bit more of a history with Campbell in terms of your coverage of what his team is looking to accomplish. And now that we see him here in Happy Valley, getting to work with a relatively new staff, starting to see some momentum build on the recruiting trail, Alan, what would you tell us about Matt Campbell, his, I guess, background as a recruiter and how you think things translate for Penn State?
Yeah, so I'll go all the way back to when I actually first met Matt Campbell. Toledo was doing a satellite camp in Detroit years and years ago, and he was on Tim Beckman's staff at the time as the offensive line coach. And it's funny, Alex Golish was the tight ends coach on that staff. And so, and that tree has produced, Jason Candle was on that staff. So you've had that tree has branched out. Several other staff members are in the NFL. And so they've come from a history of evaluation. At that point in time, Toledo was recruiting guys like Kareem Hunt, who was a kind of a late take. They went and watched him play basketball in the winter and went on him when no one else did. Came to Iowa State immediately, first class, David Montgomery, end of that cycle, guys like that. And so I think what you're going to get is a guy who, first of all, really understands evaluations and how important they are and how important it is to trust that, to get guys to camp, to go watch them play basketball and do other sports, to thoroughly vet film. You can see it talked about on other message boards around 24/7, how anytime a major school offers a kid, how often it is Iowa State was the first offer on that guy. They like to be early. They like to be thorough. They like to leave no stone unturned. And even towards the end of this cycle, when they lost some commits, the 4-star quarterback Jet Tamala flipped to Alabama. They had some other players flip to other schools. They were always ready with the next guys up. And that starts with Matt Campbell's philosophy, but it bleeds through the entire staff, including the off-field staff. Trent Sladenow and Derek Hoodger, I think, do as good a job in that department as anybody that I cover in the region.
Tyler, you've seen them work with very limited time to do so with 2026 players who were initially on board for Iowa State. What has stood out to you so far before we get into some particular names of guys who have now come on board for the Nittany Lions? What has stood out through, I don't know, a week and a few days sample size of this group trying to put together its best foot forward for a 2026 class, trying to lay the groundwork for 2027 recruits? What has really been your takeaway thus far?
In talking with some of the former Iowa State signees and guys who have ultimately landed in the class, first things first, the developmental aspect of it all. They've all praised Matt Campbell and his staff's developmental ability, and they think now that that group is at Penn State, that success is going to carry over to State College. It's a big reason why those guys have committed to Penn State or are continuing to give the Nittany Lions looks. The other thing that I've picked up on really in short order is the manner in which Matt Campbell and his staff have carried over relationships from Iowa State to Penn State. It's the same message. There's a ton of consistency across the board. Personalities haven't changed. Not that there's a bigger brand backing them or anything like that. It's the same kind of guys they dealt with from the start. There's a lot of faith, a lot of trust, strong relationships at play. All of that has carried over from Iowa State to Penn State. It's a big reason why I believe Campbell and his staff have been able to hit the ground running, rebuilding that 26 class.
Alan, who would you describe as the linchpin figures of that staff that Matt Campbell has transitioned over to State College? I think you mentioned a couple there in the front office. He was very complimentary of some of the pieces he was bringing in from a personnel general manager standpoint. We've seen now some position coaches come through. What can you maybe pass along as far as some of the routes you've seen them grow on the recruiting trail and what they might be able to do now with more resources available to them at Penn State?
Yeah, I mean, I think those off-field staff members have to be, I mentioned them already, but mention again, like when you talk about linchpins, I think Hudger in particular is a guy who had the opportunity to leave and go some other places. And Campbell always made sure that Iowa State took care of him, and he stayed. And he is an Iowa State grad, so that helped. But he was entertained by some other programs. And so that tells you how important Matt knows he is to their operation. Some of the other coaches on the staff, I mean, Taylor Mouser has established himself very quickly, not just as a recruiter, but as a coach. Deion Broomfield's a rising star, I think, in the profession. I think had they stayed at Iowa State, he was kind of on this path towards being defensive coordinator there and, headed towards some bigger things, maybe a future head coach himself. So not surprised to see him come over to Penn State. Ryan Clanton, I actually have followed for a number of years, even before he got to Iowa State, because he was at Northern Iowa. And that was at a time where they were just producing NFL prospect offensive linemen at such a high rate that it actually, they were one of the programs along with North Dakota State that made us say, maybe we need to start looking into these FCS classes a little bit higher. These guys keep pumping out, NFL prospects and really good players. And this was before the portal era. So I think Ryan Clanton, another big, addition to the Penn State staff, because we all know how important that offensive line position is. Great respect for what Phil Troutwine did. And I think Ryan Clanton's going to come in and really kind of just keep that train rolling.
Any of those guys in particular, Tyler, really stepping up so far for Penn State when you talk to these recruits? I know you're talking to a bunch of them. Some of them have already committed to Penn State. Others are taking a longer look now through some conversations. Anyone that's really got your attention early in terms of turning the recruits' heads and maybe doing some diligence through, again, a week and a half or so on the job?
Well, Ryan Clanton has really hit the ground running since he arrived at Penn State. Ton of offers have gone out to top offensive line targets in the 27 class. They dipped into the 28 class. One of their top targets at Iowa State was Carter Barrett. He is now an offered target for the Nittany Lions. So they're not just laying the foundation for success in 2027. They're trying to get a jump start in 2028 as well. So Clanton has immediately jumped out in that regard. You've seen Deion Broomfield issue some offers early as well. And then the front office personnel, those guys are working tirelessly behind the scenes to get those boards set up 26, 27, and 28. And before long, the transfer portal season is going to be here. So they're working on so many different things right now. And I think if you talk to recruits who have heard from them in some capacity, they're doing a pretty good job of not just selling the Penn State brand in the early going, but establishing, hey, look, this is how things are going to be here. These are the kind of relationship we're going to build with you, and really just stay tuned and stick and see what we build here, because patience has come up with a lot of these prospects as well. This staff is still getting settled in. They're still getting used to their surroundings. They're still getting used to new things that they have to sell. So patience has been part of the pitch as well. And a lot of prospects that I've talked to, elite guys, they're well aware of that. They're receptive to it, and they're excited to see where this new Penn State staff take things in Happy Valley.
Alan, we've talked about it a bunch. We discussed it last week with Coach Campbell himself during the introductory press conference, but he's going from one of the less enviable situations in terms of NIL roster money across the power conference landscape to a team, a program, a university that's shown they're willing to spend money on the roster. According to Pat Kraft, the athletics director, they were in top 5 of that territory here in 2025. Didn't necessarily pan out the way they wanted to on the field, but what kind of a sudden advantage does Matt Campbell have? And what kind of tools that he's already established at a program like Iowa State do you think can maybe give him an edge in a world where so many people kind of require and need to be able to write big checks and maybe they don't have as much else in their arsenal?
Yeah, that's all great points. I mean, I think, like you said, the ability to now have that NIL behind him and have, I think, a place where it's already established that Penn State can attract top recruits in the country. And I think you go back to the last few recruitments. I had somebody recently ask me has Matt Campbell ever had to go win a recruiting battle like, say, Nicholas Singleton? And he hasn't, but he has done a lot of recruiting to Iowa State, where they had to be, like I said, early on guys. They had to establish relationships. They had to be thorough in their evaluations. And I think anytime, this isn't the first time that a coach has made a jump like this. And I think anytime that happens, what they have to figure out is, how do I balance what got us here, which is finding some players that maybe everyone else missed, but now having the ability to not have to go down as far on the board, but still wanting to be thorough. And I think they're going to keep that approach. So expect some offers that you may initially say like, that wasn't a guy that we expected, but it turned out so many times at Iowa State, a kid like Elijah Reeder, for instance, in New Jersey, hiding out there right under everybody's noses, has this great, season, and Iowa State finds him. I think you're going to still see some of that, but being able to now also go after the top of the board. I would also say James Franklin and his staff did a fantastic job recruiting to Penn State. And prior to getting to Penn State, hadn't, at Vanderbilt, they weren't recruiting Nicholas Singletons and guys like that. And so you've already seen where that transition can work. I have very little doubt honestly about Matt Campbell and his staff, because they understand recruiting. They know it's important. And they recruited to their strengths and what they had to offer at Iowa State. And I think they'll do the same and adjust those standards now that they're at Penn State.
Alan, how would you describe maybe some of the industry reaction you've gotten to this marriage between Matt Campbell and Penn State, what they have at their disposal from a financial resources department, and what this may mean for both parties involved? Matt Campbell finally making that leap from Ames, and Penn State starting a new era for the first time in a dozen years.
Yeah, I think the first reaction I've gotten from people around the profession, the coaching profession, is that he bided his time, right? He's been talked about for other jobs for seems like every cycle for the last 4 or 5 years, even some NFL interest. And he's never really gotten that far down the road with any of them. And I think he waited for the right opportunity. A lot of people feel this is the right opportunity because you have at Penn State a place where, like you said, you can go win some major recruiting battles on the East Coast and into the DMV. I also believe that in a state like Pennsylvania, and he can still find there's always hidden talent in that state that goes unknown. You see guys in the portal now that are at FCS programs that are originally from the state who do really well. I think Matt Campbell's going to find those guys. He's going to get them to camp. It's not too far removed from Ohio, a very talented state that he and his staff have a lot of ties to. So I think around the profession, people see this as a very good marriage, and one that Matt Campbell really waited a long time for in terms of making sure he didn't leave Iowa State until it was the absolute right fit. And I think when you look at the reaction of Iowa State in him leaving, and you look at his emotional reaction to leaving Iowa State, it's like everybody involved knew, hey, we would love to, he would have stayed at Iowa State if it wasn't the right time. And the folks at Iowa State also knew like he was only going to leave for the right opportunity, and this is the one.
Yeah, Alan, you weren't part of the conversation last week, but a couple different times we came together for this podcast, we discussed the importance and significance of Terry Smith staying on the staff as a top lieutenant. You mentioned Pennsylvania recruiting. You mentioned kind of the regional footprint that Penn State tries to hit. He has been a key part of that for a dozen years now. He has coaching history in the state of Pennsylvania at the high school level. What did you make of Penn State not only bringing in Matt Campbell, but also being able to iron things out with Terry Smith to the point where he felt comfortable taking a step back from the head coach position, which he clearly wanted down the stretch, and again, kind of becoming a right-hand man for the head coach as he was for James Franklin?
I think very, very important. I mean, vital. And you guys know this, how hard of a push there was internally from the team in wanting to keep Terry Smith as a head coach, and to have him around, to have that continuity. So first of all, to have the Pennsylvania ties, I first met Terry when he was the high school coach at Gateway. And so he's going to have those ties. It's an important area. Iowa State has recruited Pennsylvania, some, but not a lot. So you want that tie. You have that continuity where I think not only in recruiting high school players, but keeping their own roster intact. Terry Smith, massive for that effort. And then in being at a new place, new conference, having that sort of steadying force, like you said, as a right-hand man for Matt Campbell, I think Terry Smith was extremely important to keep around. I absolutely think when you talk about the staff members that Matt Campbell brought over, you have to talk about the ones that stayed, and I think Terry Smith was a must.
Tyler, when we talk about Penn State's pickups here late in the 2026 cycle, They've gone from 2 signees just a week ago to now 6 guys on board in this class, because 4 have followed Matt Campbell, 2 defensive backs from Nebraska. You've got a Texas quarterback and an Illinois specialist. We'll talk about all of them, but I want to begin at the quarterback position because you're always wondering who's the QB of your class going to be. For a while, it looked like Penn State was going to have 2 of them in the 2026 cycle. They had Troy Hune committed out of Southern California. They also had an in-state quarterback in Peyton Falzone. Falzone ends up committed to Auburn for his senior season. He circles back late, joins this class at the very last second again, and Hune ends up with James Franklin at Virginia Tech. But there's a new name, as I said, that has entered the conversation out of Lexington, Texas, Case Evans. Tyler, what do we need to know about the newest Penn State passer, a guy who's going to be part of their 2026 roster plan?
Man, this has been a crazy quarterback recruiting cycle for Penn State. The journey that both of Penn State's 2026 quarterback commits took to get to State College, I mean, it's unlike anything I've ever seen in a cycle. Case Evans started out, Oklahoma State commit, was locked in with Mike Gundy and his staff up until Gundy's firing, landed on his feet at Iowa State with Matt Campbell. Then Campbell leaves for Penn State. Nittany Lions pick the pursuit back up. Evans commits to the Nittany Lions on Sunday. I think it's a quality get. You know, guys in Texas, the state is just so loaded and so deep. There are some players and some passers who fly a little bit under the radar. I think Evans fits into that group to an extent. One of the more productive senior quarterbacks in the Lone Star State throughout this past fall. I think he has a lot of traits that translate to the Big Ten and Power 4 football in general. Throws a really pretty deep ball. He's a tough kid, bright between the ears. Kind of kid you look at and say, hey, he doesn't necessarily have any elite traits, but he has a ton of very good traits. Maybe that places him in a position where he could play earlier than most, as opposed to a more developmental guy like Peyton Falzone, who still has a bunch of boxes to check before I think he's ready to take the field. But I think Penn State fans could look at Case Evans as a very solid addition late in this class. Penn State has to bulk this class up. Adding a guy like Evans who has traits that translate, it's a good place to start.
Yeah, let me add this on Case too. I mentioned Jet Tamala earlier, 4-star guy who flipped from Iowa State to Alabama. When he flipped, Iowa State vetted basically every available quarterback in the country, and even some of the ones that weren't available, and they landed on Case Evans out of all of those options. And so they think really, really highly of him.
Evans is a guy that like you said, Tyler, him and Falzone ended up committing to a couple schools that had coaching changes. First for him was Oklahoma State. Then it was Iowa State. He follows the Iowa State staff to Happy Valley, and he's coming off consecutive campaigns at Lexington High School in Texas with more than 30 touchdown throws on his career, 120 touchdown passes. Also a guy who did some things with his legs as a senior, almost 600 yards rushing on the ground, which was a big jump from his previous career campaigns. And we actually got some feedback from Matt Campbell on this quarterback on signing day, which is helpful for us. Back when he was Iowa State's head coach, and this was Iowa State's QB of the future, he called him, quote, one of the great steals in this class. And Campbell referenced going down to Lexington for a game during a bye week that Iowa State had, threw for almost 300 yards, rushed for almost 200 yards, did a lot of things that they were excited about, and that remains the case with the Nittany Lions. And when you look at this position, Alan, Penn State is coming off back-to-back cycles now. Well, I guess including the 2026 cycle, where the quarterback can be labeled kind of a project. Peyton Falzone, I think, certainly fits that bill. Really impressive athletic specimen, ways to go in his development as a passer. And then last year was Beckham Kritza, who was at like 5 or 6 different schools at the high school level, didn't get a long run of playing time at any of them, and then came to camp last year as a relatively raw piece. And so you add Evans into the fold. One, what does this mean for Matt Campbell and you know, this offense trying to get off on the right foot with some roster development? And two, how much does this still look like a squad that needs to take a hard look at the transfer portal this winter?
Yeah, so first with quarterback being a developmental position, I think that fits Matt Campbell and his crew very well. This is the kind of guy that they've always taken. And even, Brock Purdy wasn't like this high 4-star, 5-star kind of guy. And they've developed these types of players in the past. And, the last time there was a regime change at Penn State, they kind of brought an athletic project quarterback with them in Trace McSorley from Vanderbilt. That turned out pretty well. If Case Evans can be this group's Trace McSorley, which I think is certainly possible, then that's a success. And I think he has some of the same kind of traits and talents that Trace brought to the table. That being said, I think you have to explore the transfer portal for a quarterback. I don't know what options will be available that would be interested in coming into this situation like Penn State. But I think with the way Matt Campbell and his staff have recruited quarterbacks, there's going to be some guys that they've offered in the past that may be available. So definitely something that's going to have to be considered. And I do think the transfer portal is so deep nowadays that there will be some options if they choose to go that route.
Let me go back to you on that one, Tyler, because you do a great job of covering the portal when that thing gets wide open in January. We talked about this last week. Is this the first offseason where Penn State takes a serious plunge into that quarterback portal list? And part of the conversation here is Rocco Becht. What is he looking to do at Iowa State? Is he looking to continue his career with Matt Campbell? Are there other sharks circling around him right now who need a quarterback? And then Ethan Grunkmeyer, 6-game sample size as starting quarterback here at Penn State. He'll get a 7th game against Clemson in a couple of weeks. And then, what's next for him? That's been a question. So, Tyler, when you kind of view the addition of Case Evans and what else I just mentioned, how much do you think the transfer portal is in play for Penn State at quarterback getting ready for 2026?
Definitely think it's still in play. Adding experience matters, adding talent matters. That's across the board at every position, but especially under center at quarterback. Going out, targeting, and getting a guy who fits the offense Matt Campbell and Taylor Mauser want to run, that is paramount. Now, I think Ethan Grunkemeyer fits that offense as well. That was a guy that Campbell and company showed interest in at Iowa State. They offered Grunkemeyer, again, as Al noted earlier than most. He lands at Penn State. He's a guy who has the traits to succeed in the offense, but quarterback is definitely going to remain in play in the portal if the right fit presents itself. And it's like I said last week, Tyler, they're not going to try and force anything. They're not going to try and fit the round peg into the square hole. It's not going to be that kind of a deal. It's going to be a guy who fits the system for sure if it presents itself.
Looking at 2 defensive backs from Nebraska that have come on board in the 2026 class for Penn State, Tyrell Chapman out of Lincoln, and then Bryson Williams out of Omaha. Couple of dudes who were previously planning to play for Iowa State. And so, Tyler, going back to you, what do we need to know about this pair and their path to Penn State's class?
So I'll start with Tyrell Chapman because I really, really like him. I wrote about him and Case Evans yesterday having the chance to go down as potential steals for Penn State. I mean, Chapman offers a ton of intrigue to me on a couple different fronts. One, the long speed is legit. 21.8 in the 200-meter. 48.19 in the, I believe it was the 400 at 6'2", around 180. That's real. And then I believe he's also posted sub 10.8 in the 100-meter as well. So there's short area speed and quickness as well. The athletic upside is very, very intriguing there. But I touch on the track times first. Tyrell Chapman's not a guy who is just a speedster who needs to learn how to play in the secondary at a Power 4 level. He has exhibited, I think, some strong cover ability on tape, specifically in zone. So there's a lot there. He's another guy who's strong between the ears. He's a smart kid. He's played quarterback for his high school team in Nebraska. There's going to be a jump up in competition, but I mean, that's just the name of the game, going from Nebraska to the Big Ten. So Tyrell Chapman offers a ton of intrigue to me athletically. I could say the same about Bryson Williams as well. Another kid, I mean, his frame is tantalizing. 6'4", around 180, really impressive wingspan. Some of the subscribers on our board have referred to him as a kind of a lighter version of Joey O'Brien, the 5-star Pennsylvania product who landed at Notre Dame. Bryson Williams has to get stronger. There's no doubt about that, and to improve as a tackler and in that realm. But that frame, he's a fast kid, more impressive track times from him. I think both of these DBs that Penn State added over the weekend, they project really nicely as part of this 26 class.
Tyler, do we see Williams as a safety all the way? Chapman maybe being a guy that has a little more kind of versatility in the defensive backfield, or are these just 2 safeties in the eyes of the Penn State staff?
Williams safety. Chapman offers positional versatility, but in the early going, I've heard cornerback for him.
Okay. Alan, bringing you in on those 2 guys, a couple players who had spent some time in Iowa State's recruiting class at defensive back. Anything to add on either, on both Williams and Chapman?
Yeah, I mean, I think Tyler did a great job of covering their traits and why this staff, they're not bringing everybody over from the class, but why they're bringing these 2 in particular. But I also think this is, in a general sense, this is the kind of player Penn State fans can expect Matt Campbell and company to target. 2 guys where you go 6'4", running a 10.8, 6'1" and long and running a 10.7, and yet somehow they weren't fighting off a bunch of other Power 4 schools on these guys. Chapman was flipped from Northern Illinois. I think Williams was Washington State for a period of time, and then had some other schools looking at him, but they weren't top of board guys. And then you look at their physical traits and their production, and you go, what did everybody else miss? This is the kind of guy that Matt Campbell and his staff seem to find over and over again.
And the fourth name here is going to be a little bit less fanfare, but because he's a specialist, but could be important for Penn State long-term. Lucas Tenbrock out of Illinois, St. Charles North High School. Tyler, what do we need to know about Tenbrock? A big 6'6" punter. Penn State has been able to rely on a couple different players in that role this year. Largely been Gabe Nwosu. In the past, it's been Riley Thompson, who remains on the roster. But these guys are at the end of their college careers. There's going to need to be some fresh competition at punter. They thought they might be getting that from Ireland. That guy is now committed to UNC. And so what do we need to know about the replacement here?
So Lucas Tenbrock, he's really intriguing to me. I think he has the opportunity as he develops to become a real special teams weapon for Penn State. He placed a lot of faith in Matt Campbell and his staff throughout the recruiting process. Yes, he's coming in as a punter. I know that's a question we often have to answer with specialists. Is he coming in as a kicker? Is he coming in as a punter? Is he going to take a crack at both? Tenbrock is coming in as a punter. Averaged about, I believe it was 43 yards per punt during his junior year. Really just continued to thrive as a senior. Again, great relationship with the staff. I think he's going to have the chance to develop into a really solid special teams weapon for Penn State down the road. And he's the latest in a long line of physically big specialists that Penn State has brought in.
Yeah, he fits that description for sure. And I know that he's very highly thought of in the rankings world. We've got him as the number 5 punter at that 24/7 Sports. I believe he is number 1 on the sailor kicking rankings, and which is something I always pay some attention toward. And Alan, look, this is a class that only has 6 guys on board right now. People were really freaking out a couple weeks ago when you only signed 2 players for Penn State. Only one of them was committed when James Franklin was fired back in mid-October. Poor Tyler here had to cover a class that unraveled from like 25 commits down to just 2 signees. But what do you make of the opportunity that Campbell and his staff have to add some talent to this thing, to try to put together a freshman class, and how important ultimately this class could prove to be, as Penn State's going to have a lot of concerns, question marks with their roster building once this season wraps up?
So I think the first thing is, like I just said, they're not bringing everyone that was committed to Iowa State over with them. And I think that tells you that they're aware that they need something different to win at Penn State than they did previously. Otherwise, they would take all of them. So they're already understanding Penn State and the Big Ten and the league and what's in front of them. And I think they're also not sort of panicking and saying, we walked into a class that only has 2 signees. Let's just fill it. They're being judicious about this, which I think is a good thing. So next month, I mean, I just mentioned Elijah Reeder. I think he's very much in play. I think there's some other guys that were committed to them that may still be in play. I think Samson Gash is a big one. 4-star legacy recruit. He would be a great addition. That one, I talked to sources close to him every couple of days, and he's still got to figure this thing out. A lot of moving parts in that one. He's committed to Michigan State. He's got to get up there and meet Pat Fitzgerald. They're not even fully sure who the receivers coach is going to be there yet. Got to get out to Penn State, got to meet Coach Campbell, et cetera. Got to get down to Georgia now that they've offered. And so, but that would be a really, really nice piece to add. Like I said, I don't think they're going to feel the pressure to just fill a class with high school kids who are just filler. And so I think you'll probably see a little bit of a smaller class and then probably more attacking the portal at that point. And so I think if this was 5-10 years ago, you'd say they're in some dire straits with trying to, figure this roster out. Now with the transfer portal, I think there's no reason to panic, and they won't, and they'll be able to go into that portal and get some players.
You mentioned a wide receiver in there, Samson Gash, a guy who's committed to another Big Ten team. We're still waiting for official word on Penn State's receivers coach too, but there have been a lot of rumblings, a lot of conversation that Noah Pauley is going to be the guy who makes that move ultimately from Iowa State. Any kind of background you could give us on him, because this is a spot in a position room that's really been in the spotlight for Penn State for the wrong reasons the last few years. They've brought in some different transfer players. They've brought in some younger talent they like, and yet you get into the biggest games of the season And that's been one of the primary shortcomings is production from the receiver spot. So, Alan, if Noah Pauly does prove to be the receivers coach here, continuing his career under Matt Campbell, what do we need to know about him?
He's done a fantastic job. I mean, Iowa State the last few seasons has had really great production from their receivers. And this goes back to the beginning, even before Noah Pauly was involved. Matt Campbell and the staff have always done really well at that position. Hakeem Butler was in their first class, I believe, ends up being an NFL guy. They hadn't had a receiver drafted in years and years and years. And he became one of the first. And then Noah Pauly in recent years with Jay Higgins and Jalen Noel puts two guys into the early rounds of the NFL draft. And so, he's recruited well. He's evaluated well and developed well. And I think if he's the guy, it's for good reason that they want to bring him along, because he's another guy kind of in the Deion Broomfield mold, I think, of a rising star in this profession. And Matt Campbell, the Matt Campbell tree has grown a lot. He's always found these guys. Nate Shieldhouse is one of them. He's in the pros now. Tom Manning, who was with him, in the pros now. Lou Ianni, who was with him, is in the pros now. And so I think Noah Pauly's kind of the next one that fits into that lineage.
We'll start to finish up this episode. I want to go over to you, Tyler, and talk about who could be next when trying to fill out this 2026 class. Again, we're not expecting it to be a massive class all of a sudden, but we don't think it's done quite yet with 6 players on board. So I know some of the names have come up during this conversation, maybe reemphasize a few of them, bring others to the forefront, because you have a story up at Lions247.com on Tuesday early about some of these other names that could be fits for the new staff.
Yeah, Alan touched on Elijah Reeder. He told our guy Brian Doan, who does a great job covering the Northeast here at 24/7, that he has received his release from Iowa State. So he's back out on the market, and he's a guy that we immediately circled on our end. He just makes so much sense on so many different fronts. First things first, he's in the footprint as a New Jersey product. He's actually from my neck of the woods down in Central Jersey. So I've seen a lot of Elijah Reeder tape. The kid can play. There's no doubt about it. And he has a lot of traits that Matt Campbell and the Penn State staff like and covet in high school recruiting. So Reeder's a guy I have circled, and we're keeping a really close eye on him. Another one who received his release on Monday is Nebraska linebacker Kean Kaiser. He was one of the more talented defenders in general in Iowa State's signing class. Immediately keeping an eye on him, he told me that he is open to Penn State, has a good relationship with Coach Campbell and the rest of the Penn State defensive staff that has followed Campbell to Iowa State. A few other guys we're storing away right now. Ohio offensive tackle Pete Iglesias, he's one we're keeping an eye on. There has been a pretty solid amount of contact with Ryan Clanton so far. The big thing with Iglesias is he has said he is not planning on signing until February. So his recruitment could carry on a little while longer. It also opens the door for him to visit Penn State in January if he wishes to do so. In speaking with Iglesias, some Big Ten programs have been involved, some ACC programs have been involved. So it's not just Penn State doing some sniffing around here. Alan touched on Sam Gash. He was a guy that I highlighted in my piece this morning. Really beyond that group, it's keeping an eye on guys who have yet to receive a release from Iowa State, or at least publicly announce that they received a release from Iowa State. There are guys who have traits that would appeal, I believe, to this new Penn State staff should they choose to reopen their recruitment. Another one who would make sense for Penn State who falls into that realm would be defensive back Josiah Zayas. I believe I'm saying his last name correctly. He finished his prep career at Piscataway High, started things out at St. Thomas Aquinas in Central Jersey, offers positional versatility in the secondary. He can give you good looks at corner, safety, can even play wide receiver as well. He's a name who's popped up in conversation. If he gets his release, keep an eye on him. So there's still plenty to be done for Penn State in this 26 class, whether it be former Iowa State signees or guys who are just lingering on the open market, and guys like Sam Gash who are still committed elsewhere.
Yeah, let me ask you this, Tyler, just so we can kind of close the chapter if it needs to be closed. Any of those guys who backed off of Penn State commitments, signed with other programs, any chance somebody circles back because they're having second thoughts now that Penn State's a more stable situation, or should we just consider those ships sailed?
I wouldn't consider them sailed. I haven't necessarily heard of any traction on that front, but it might be something that we revisit in January once the portal opens, because some of these guys, well, many of them, are early enrollees. What happens if they get to their school of choice after Penn State. They decide they don't want to be there. They're not a fit, whatever it may be. They hit the portal. Maybe they circle back with this new Penn State staff. But not hearing a ton of traction on that front right now. I think we're very much in wait and see mode.
A lot of reporting from Tyler Calvaruso at Lions247.com on the 2026 class and some things coming together here late under Matt Campbell. Additionally, there is a lot with the 2027 class that is underway that Tyler has you covered more. Wanted to kind of focus on the 26 stuff here for the podcast since it's a lot more timely right now, but a lot more happening on the recruiting front than we've had in recent weeks. Please check that out. And Alan, I want to finish with you here. Looking at that 2027 cycle, we've got a lot to learn. There's going to be prospect camps. There's going to be new offers. We're going to see how this new staff handles its official visits. All that stuff will be laid out over the course of the cycle. But what are your expectations at this stage, very early portion of the cycle, for how things could work out for Matt Campbell, his staff, and 2027 targets?
Yeah, the only expectation for me is that they're going to be super aggressive. And that means I think you'll see junior days. I think you'll see a lot of recruits coming to spring practice. I think you'll see coaches going on the road and canvassing a wide array of places and parts of the country. And they're going to spread the brand and that they're at the brand, they're wearing the brand, and they're going to try to get as many kids on campus as they can. And so I would expect that may not produce early commitments necessarily. I think recruits are going to want to wait and kind of see how that thing looks. But this is a staff that's really good, I think, at laying the foundation for future commitments. And I think they're going to do that in the winter and spring and then see if they can get some of those guys back in official visit season as we approach summer, and then maybe try to close some of them down then. But expect them to cast a wide net. And like I said, they understand recruiting. They know it's important. They're going to get after it.
Comprehensive perspective from Alan True. That's what we always expect from Alan whenever he pops his head in with us at Lions247.com. We always appreciate it. Does a great job covering the national landscape as well for 24/7 Sports. And Tyler, we'll talk to you real soon here on the podcast. Alan, down the road, we'll hopefully get you back on again. But thanks for everything you've done and lending a hand as we kind of transition to our coverage of the Matt Campbell recruiting era. Tyler, keep up the good work. Talk to you real soon at Lions247.com. And for everyone out there, we're going to have a second episode coming your way later this week. We'll address the latest with this coaching staff, and we will start to put that matchup against Clemson in the Pinstripe Bowl in our focus a bit more as well. That'll be coming your way later in the week. For now, check out our coverage over at Lions247.com. Thanks for listening or watching. I am Tyler Donahue, stepping aside for now, the Lions 24/7 podcast.